was a crisp autumn day when the news of Julian Blackwell's inheritance reached the townspeople of Edgewater. The Blackwell family, a name synonymous with power and prestige, had fallen into a strange sort of silence in the years leading up to the patriarch's death. George Blackwell, a towering figure in business and society, had passed away under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind an empire built from nothing but sheer ambition and ruthless determination. But it wasn't George's death that had everyone talking. It was his son, Julian. Julian Blackwell, the heir to the Blackwell fortune, was a man of contradictions. He had always been a shadow in the family's public life, hidden away from the limelight and shrouded in secrecy. As a boy, he was known for his peculiar behavior, an odd mix of genius and madness that no one truly understood. Some believed he had inherited his father's sharp mind, while others whispered that he had inherited something far darker, a descent into madness that ran deep within the Blackwell bloodline. When the news of George's passing broke, Julian had been living in the family estate, hidden away from the world. No one had seen or heard from him in years. The townspeople remembered a young, promising man, with the weight of the world on his shoulders. But after his mother's sudden death, when he was still a teenager, Julian had retreated into isolation. His life, once full of potential, had spiraled into something unrecognizable. No one could predict what would come next. Julian's inheritance was the talk of the town, not because of the wealth he now controlled, but because of the rumors surrounding his state of mind. People spoke in hushed tones about his strange behavior, his inability to face reality, and his growing obsession with his family's past. Some said he had become obsessed with unlocking the secrets that had been buried in the Blackwell family vaults for generations, secrets too dark to be revealed. Others swore that Julian had always known something that no one else did, something about the Blackwell fortune that was far more sinister than anyone could imagine. And so, as Julian stood at the family's grand estate, looking out over the vast land that had been his birthright, he made a decision. He would not follow in his father's footsteps. He would not carry on the family legacy of power and influence. Instead, he would burn it all to the ground. The first sign of Julian's madness came when he started selling off the family's assets. The mansion, the lands, the investments, it all went up for sale. Rumors spread quickly that Julian had sold the estate to the highest bidder, but no one knew who had purchased it. What was once a symbol of the Blackwell legacy was now just another abandoned property, falling into disrepair as Julian moved deeper into his obsession with the past. But it wasn't just the family fortune that he sought to destroy. It was everything. His every action seemed driven by a desire to wipe the slate clean, to erase the Blackwell name from history entirely. He started with the family's vault, a place that had always been rumored to hold the key to the Blackwell fortune. Julian began digging through the vault's dusty, forgotten corners, searching for something that would explain the darkness that had plagued his family for generations. And then, one night, it happened. Julian stumbled upon an old journal, its pages yellowed with age, and its cover fraying at the edges. The journal was written by his great-grandfather, the founder of the Blackwell dynasty. It was filled with strange symbols, cryptic messages, and what appeared to be a map that led to a place no one had dared speak of for decades. The map depicted a hidden location deep within the Blackwell estate, a place so secret that even the family had forgotten about it. It was a place where the Blackwell ancestors had gathered to conduct dark rituals that had been passed down through the generations, each one more twisted than the last. As Julian read the journal, he became consumed with the idea of uncovering this hidden place. He believed that the key to his family's legacy lay buried within the walls of this forgotten chamber. But what he didn't know was that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous his obsession became. For with every page he turned, he began to lose himself to the madness that had claimed his ancestors before him. It wasn't long before the townspeople began to notice the strange changes in Julian. He stopped attending to the estate, leaving it in disrepair. He stopped interacting with the outside world, retreating further into the shadows of the family's dark history. The once promising heir to the Blackwell fortune was now a shell of his former self, consumed by his search for answers. But even as Julian spiraled further into madness, there were those who believed that the family's secrets were better left buried. They had witnessed the toll that the Blackwell legacy had taken on previous generations, how the thirst for power and wealth had corrupted everything it touched. They knew that there was something deeply wrong with the family, something that Julian was now determined to uncover, even if it meant losing everything in the process. And so, as the town of Edgewater whispered about Julian's madness, the question remained: what had he uncovered in the depths of the Blackwell vault? And what would he do with the knowledge that he had gained? Was there truly a secret that could explain the darkness that had plagued the family for generations? Or was it all just a product of Julian's crumbling mind? As Julian prepared to take the next step in his descent into madness, the town watched with bated breath. They knew that once the secrets of the Blackwell family were exposed, there would be no turning back. The family that had defied death for generations would finally meet its end, but not before one final horrifying revelation. Julian Blackwell had always been different. As a boy, he was never quite the same as the other children in Edgewater. His classmates recalled how he would retreat into himself, his eyes clouded with thoughts far beyond his years. He was the kind of child who would rather spend hours in the library, buried in old books, than play outside with the others. He had inherited his father's sharp intellect, but his obsession with history, with power, and with the Blackwell family name quickly set him apart. But it wasn't just his intelligence that separated him from the rest. It was the eerie, unsettling presence he carried with him. People spoke of the strange chill that would settle in the room when Julian entered, the way his gaze seemed to pierce through you, seeing things you didn't even understand about yourself. He was a quiet observer, watching the world unfold with a calculating step, and when he spoke, it was often with an unsettling certainty, as if he already knew the future before it even happened. His obsession with the family's past began early, long before his father's death. George Blackwell had been a strict, distant man, driven by a need to expand the Blackwell empire at any cost. He had little patience for his son's peculiarities, dismissing Julian's passion for history and ancient rituals as nothing more than childish fantasy. But Julian had never given up. As he grew older, his curiosity deepened, and he began to uncover strange stories that had been buried in the family's archives for decades. What he found was disturbing, to say the least. It started with whispers, rumors that had been passed down from one generation to the next, stories of the Blackwell family's involvement in occult practices, secret societies, and rituals that defied reason. The further Julian dug, the more unsettling the discoveries became. He uncovered letters, diaries, and journals detailing the family's dark dealings, their pursuit of power, and their willingness to sacrifice everything, including their souls, to maintain their status. The deeper Julian went, the more he began to understand the true nature of the Blackwell family's wealth. It wasn't just money or land that had made them powerful. It was something far darker, something that had been passed down through the generations like a cursed inheritance. Julian began to believe that the family had made a pact with forces beyond their understanding. They had sold their souls in exchange for the fortune that had made them one of the wealthiest families in the country. As Julian pieced together the fragments of his family's dark history, he began to see a pattern, a terrifying pattern of bloodshed, betrayal, and madness. Every Blackwell heir, it seemed, had been touched by the same curse. They were all driven to madness in their pursuit of power, each one losing themselves to the darkness that had been passed down through the generations. And now, Julian was no different. The journal he had found in the vault had been his final clue, the one that tied everything together. His great-grandfather's writings spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the Blackwell estate, a place where the family's darkest rituals had taken place. It was said to be a room that could grant unimaginable power, but at a terrible cost. The family had built the mansion on top of the chamber, sealing it away for generations, hoping to keep its secrets buried. But Julian had no intention of leaving it sealed. He became obsessed with the idea of unlocking the chamber's secret. He believed that the power hidden within those walls was the key to unlocking his true potential, the key to escaping the curse that had haunted his family for centuries. He would not be like his ancestors, driven to madness by the darkness they had unleashed. No, he would be different. He would control the darkness, bend it to his will. And so, Julian set about preparing for the most dangerous undertaking of his life. He gathered all the necessary tools, ancient artifacts, symbols and texts, from long-forgotten rituals. He spent hours, days, weeks, poring over the journals and manuscripts that his ancestors had left behind, trying to decipher the cryptic language that would unlock the chamber. He was determined to succeed where his ancestors had failed. But as he worked, something changed. The closer he came to unlocking the chamber's secrets, the more he felt something shifting within him. It was as though the power he sought was beginning to take hold of him, corrupting him, just as it had corrupted every Blackwell heir before him. He began to hear voices, whispers that echoed in his mind, calling to him, urging him to continue. The voices spoke of power, of wealth, of the Blackwell legacy, but they also spoke of sacrifice, of the price that would have to be paid for such power. Julian's dreams became filled with visions of his ancestors, their eyes hollow, their faces twisted in agony. They reached out to him, begging him to stop, to leave the chamber sealed forever. But Julian wouldn't listen. He believed that he was different. He believed that he could control the darkness. And so, one fateful night, he unlocked the hidden door to the chamber beneath the mansion. As the door creaked open, a rush of cold air poured out from the depths below, sending a shiver down his spine. Julian stepped into the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath quickening with anticipation. Inside the chamber, he found what he had been searching for, a pedestal, adorned with strange symbols and flickering candles. On the pedestal was a small, ancient box, its surface covered in dust. Julian reached out trembling, and lifted the box from its resting place. The moment his fingers brushed the box, a jolt of energy shot through him, sending him crashing to the ground. The chamber seemed to shake, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. Julian's vision blurred, and he felt as though he were being pulled into another world, a world where time no longer existed, where reality itself seemed to twist and bend. And then he heard it, the voice. Julian Blackwell, it whispered, its tone like 1,000 voices speaking at once. You have unlocked the secret that was meant to remain buried. You have claimed what was never meant for you. Julian's heart raced as the voice grew louder, more insistent. The power he had sought was now his. But at what cost? He had defied death, defied the curse that had plagued his family for generations. But in doing so, he had awakened something far worse, something that had been sleeping beneath the Blackwell estate for centuries. As Julian lay on the cold stone floor, the weight of his actions began to sink in. He had made a terrible mistake. The darkness he sought to control was now in control of him, but it was too late to turn back. The days that followed were a blur. Julian couldn't remember the exact moment the world around him began to shift, but one thing was undeniable. He was no longer the same man who had entered the hidden chamber beneath the mansion. The whispers, the voices, and the overwhelming sense of power that had once exhilarated him had now become his prison. He felt the presence of something ancient, watching him, following his every move. It was as though the chamber had opened a gateway to something far darker than he could have ever imagined. His body trembled with the strange energy that now flowed through him, and his mind, once sharp and calculated, became clouded with hallucinations and disturbing visions. He saw his ancestors' faces, twisted with pain, their eyes filled with a hollow emptiness, as they reached out to him, their silent cries echoing in the depths of his soul. At first Julian tried to fight it. He locked himself in his study, poring over the journals and texts he had gathered, searching for any way to undo the damage he had done. He refused to believe that the curse had taken root, that the power he had sought had already begun to consume him. But no matter how hard he tried, the darkness only grew stronger. The whispers, the visions, and the crushing weight of guilt pressed down on him. Day by day, it wasn't long before Julian became paranoid. He started seeing things,
figures lurking in the shadows of his mansion, watching him with eyes that seemed to pierce through his very soul. His staff grew concerned, noticing how pale and gaunt he had become, how he seemed to be lost in a world of his own. Julian began to distance himself from everyone, cutting off contact with his closest confidants, and locking himself in the mansion. At all hours of the night, the mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the silence was deafening. But the whispers never stopped. They echoed in the halls, in his mind, and in the deepest corners of his heart. They told him stories, stories of power, of blood, of sacrifice. They promised him more wealth, more control, more immortality. All he had to do was give in. All he had to do was surrender. One night, unable to resist the pull any longer, Julian returned to the hidden chamber. The box was still on the pedestal, the candle flames flickering ominously in the air. He hesitated, his hands trembling, before he reached for it again. The moment he touched the box, a surge of energy coursed through him, stronger than ever before. The walls of the chamber seemed to vibrate, and Julian felt as though he was being torn apart from the inside. Suddenly, the visions returned, only this time they were more vivid, more terrifying. He saw the Blackwell family's history unfold before him, the deals with dark forces, the blood rituals, the sacrifices made to secure their wealth and power. He saw the deaths, the madness, the suffering, and then he saw himself standing at the center of it all, a puppet master controlling the strings of fate. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. He was no different from the ancestors he had admired, no different from the men and women who had traded their souls for power. He had become the very thing he had sought to escape. He was a part of the curse, and now there was no way out.
But the darkness didn't stop there. It began to seep into the mansion itself. Julian could feel it in the air, in the walls, in the very foundation of the house. It was as though the mansion had become a reflection of his own soul, decaying, corrupt, and beyond saving. He tried to leave, to flee, but the mansion held him in its grip. He was trapped. Days turned into weeks, and Julian grew more and more isolated. His staff began to disappear, one by one. At first they left quietly, giving vague excuses about needing to attend to personal matters. But soon the mansion was eerily quiet. The halls echoed with silence, save for the whispers that never ceased. The servants who remained were too afraid to speak, too afraid to look him in the eye. They knew what had happened, what he had unleashed. They knew that the power Julian sought had come at a terrible cost, and they knew that they were all in danger. Julian tried to convince himself that he was still in control, that he could harness the power he had awakened. But deep down, he knew the truth. The power wasn't his to command. It had its own will, its own hunger, and it was feeding on him. One evening, as the sun set behind the towering trees that surrounded the estate, Julian found himself standing in the mansion's grand hall, staring at his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in weeks, he looked at himself clearly. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his skin pale. He looked nothing like the man he had once been. He had become a ghost, haunted by the very power he had sought to control. The door to the chamber creaked open behind him, and Julian turned, his heart racing. He expected to see nothing but the darkness that had consumed him. But instead he saw a figure, a man, tall, imposing, with eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. It was his ancestor, a man who had died long before Julian was born. The figure stared at him, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "You've done it," the figure said, his voice like a hiss. "You've claimed the power, and now it's yours to bear." Julian's heart raced as the figure stepped forward, its presence suffocating. The darkness that had once seemed like a distant shadow was now all around him, consuming him, pulling him into its depths. "You can't escape it," the figure whispered, his voice a cold, cruel echo. "The curse is yours now, and you will never be free." And with that, the figure vanished into the darkness, leaving Julian alone, trapped in the mansion that had once been his family's pride. As the days dragged on, Julian found himself slipping further into madness. The mansion, once a symbol of his family's grandeur, had become his prison. Every corner seemed to mock him. Every shadow whispered secrets he wasn't ready to hear. The weight of the curse that had been passed down through generations now bore down on him with crushing force. There was no escape, no way out of the darkness he had invited in. But it wasn't just the mansion that had changed. It was Julian himself. The man who had once stood confidently at the helm of his family's wealth and influence was now a broken shell, consumed by fear and paranoia. His once sharp mind had been clouded by the whispers, the visions, and the ever-present feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for him to break. He tried to leave. He attempted to flee the estate, to break free of the clutches of the curse. But every time he stepped outside, the world seemed to warp around him. The mansion, the land, the very air itself seemed to reject him, pulling him back with an invisible force. He was trapped in a world of his own making, unable to escape the consequences of his actions. It wasn't long before Julian's paranoia escalated into obsession. He spent hours poring over the ancient texts and journals he had inherited, searching for a way to break the curse, to undo the horrors that had been set in motion. He combed through every letter, every diary, every scrap of paper he could find, desperately seeking a clue, a loophole, a weakness in the curse that he could exploit. But as he read, he began to understand the truth. There was no way out. The curse had been carefully crafted, passed down through the generations, and each Blackwell heir had been doomed to suffer its consequences. The price of wealth, of power, had been too high, and now it was Julian's turn to pay. One night, as he sat in the dimly lit study, Julian made a chilling discovery. Buried deep within the family's records was a letter written by his great-grandfather, a man whose name was whispered in fear throughout the family. The letter, though faded with age, was clear in its message. The bloodline is cursed. We have bargained with forces we cannot understand. We have sold our souls for power, and now the price must be paid. The words sent a shiver down Julian's spine. He had known the Blackwell family history was steeped in darkness, but this letter confirmed it. His ancestors had made a pact, one that had bound them to forces far beyond their control, and now it was his turn to fulfill that pact. The weight of the curse pressed down on him, and he felt himself unraveling. He had inherited not just the wealth of his family, but its legacy, the legacy of greed, of ambition, and of destruction. And it was a legacy that was now consuming him, body and soul. Desperation set in. Julian began to search for anything, any way to escape the curse. He delved deeper into the occult, seeking out forbidden knowledge that could give him the power to break free. He contacted mystics, necromancers, and scholars who dealt in the dark arts, hoping to find someone who could offer him a solution. But each time he was met with failure. The price of meddling with forces beyond comprehension was steep, and no one had the answers he sought. But there was one last hope. A rumor he had heard in passing, a whisper among the dark circles of occultists he had frequented. It was said that there was a ritual, an ancient ritual, that could sever the bond between the Blackwell family and the curse that had haunted them for centuries. The ritual, however, was not without its risks. It required a sacrifice, a life, the blood of the one who had inherited the curse. Julian's heart raced as he thought about it. The ritual could work. It was the only way to escape the endless cycle of pain,
and madness that had consumed his family for generations. But the cost was unimaginable. He would have to sacrifice himself, his life, his soul, his legacy. It was a choice he didn't take lightly, but in the end, it was the only choice he had left. The darkness had taken everything from him. The mansion, his sanity, his very humanity, and now, it was time to take back control, to end the curse, once and for all. Julian prepared for the ritual with a sense of finality. He spent the final hours of his life in the mansion, walking through the halls that had once been filled with laughter and joy. Now empty and cold, the walls seemed to close in on him, the shadows lengthening. As the night wore on, he could feel the presence of something ancient, something watching him from the darkness. The ritual required him to enter the hidden chamber beneath the mansion, the same chamber where it all began, the place where the power had been unlocked. The air was thick with the same energy that had first consumed him, and as he stepped inside, he felt the weight of his ancestors' sins pressing down on him. He recited the incantation, his voice trembling with fear and determination. The room seemed to tremble with the power that was being unleashed, and for a moment Julian felt as though he was being torn apart from the inside. His body convulsed with the force of the ritual, and he felt his soul slipping away, being consumed by the very darkness he had once sought to control. But then, just as it seemed like he would be lost forever, something changed. The darkness receded, and Julian felt himself released from its grip. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, his body exhausted from the struggle. The curse had been lifted, but at what cost? As he lay there dying, Julian realized that the power he had once craved had been his undoing. The family fortune, the mansion, the legacy, it had all been a trap that had consumed everyone who had dared to pursue it. And now, it was his turn to pay the price. The last thing Julian saw before he died was the face of his ancestor, watching him with cold, indifferent eyes. The bloodline had been severed. The curse had been broken, but it had come at a terrible cost. The house stood silent, but the echoes of its haunted history reverberated through every creaking floorboard and every flicker of candlelight. The curse had been broken. Julian had paid the price, his life sacrificed to sever the chains that had bound his family to darkness for centuries. But as the final breath left his lips, something shifted in the house. The air grew colder, the shadows deep. A new presence stirred, one that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. In the aftermath of the ritual, the mansion felt different, emptier yet filled with a palpable tension, as though something was watching from just out of sight. The walls seemed to hum with a strange energy, as if the house itself was aware of what had transpired within its walls. And Julian's death, his final desperate attempt to free himself from the curse, had set something into motion that no one could have foreseen. Weeks passed in the wake of Julian's demise. The mansion, now abandoned, had been left to decay, its once stately rooms now silent and lifeless. The family fortune, the vast empire that had been built upon greed, manipulation, and secrets, was left to rot with its last heir. The Blackwell legacy, once untouchable, had crumbled into dust. But for some reason, the curse did not die with Julian. It lingered, stubbornly refusing to be erased from the fabric of reality. The mansion, once a symbol of power and wealth, had become a place of unbearable sorrow, a place where time itself seemed to bend and stretch, where the past and present collided in a storm of darkness. The authorities had arrived, of course. They had found Julian's body, lifeless, on the floor of the hidden chamber, where he had performed the final ritual. But they found nothing else. No sign of a struggle, no trace of the dark forces that had consumed. There were no clues as to what had happened in the house, only the ominous sense that something terrible had taken place. The house was sealed, its doors locked, its windows boarded up. Yet, despite the best efforts of the authorities, Something refused to let the mansion be forgotten. Over time, rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers of strange occurrences, unexplained lights flickering in the windows at night, and unsettling noises emanating from within. People spoke of the house as though it were alive, as though it had been marked by something beyond human comprehension. Local townsfolk began to notice strange changes in the surrounding landscape. The once thriving village nearby began to suffer, its prosperity dwindling as if the curse had spread outward, infecting everything in its path. Crops withered in the fields, animals grew sick and died, and a sense of unease settled over the area. No one dared to speak of the Blackwell mansion, but everyone knew that it had left a stain on the land, a stain that couldn't be washed away. It wasn't long before a group of ambitious treasure hunters, drawn by the allure of the family fortune and the legends surrounding the house, arrived at the mansion. They believed they could find the hidden riches that had once belonged to the Blackwell family, convinced that the mansion held secrets that had yet to be uncovered. They were wrong. The group of adventurers made their way to the mansion, under the cover of night, their flashlights flickering. As they crossed the overgrown grounds, the house loomed in front of them, its dark windows staring down like hollow eyes, and its doors creaked ominously in the wind. But they pressed on, undeterred by the warnings they had heard from the villagers, convinced that they would be the ones to unlock the mysteries of the Blackwell estate. As they entered the mansion, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding, and the silence was broken only by the soft echo of their footsteps. They moved through the grand hallways, their torches casting long shadows on the crumbling walls. They searched every room, every hidden corner, but found nothing until they reached the basement. The door to the basement was heavy, rusted with age, and when they forced it open, a cold draft rushed out as though something was pushing against it from the inside. The smell that greeted them was unbearable, a mixture of decay, rot, and something far more sinister. The group hesitated at the threshold, unsure of what awaited them in the darkness below, but their curiosity overcame them. They descended into the basement, the air thick with an oppressive energy. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the temperature dropped rapidly, causing their breath to fog in the cold. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, their flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the stone floor. Then they saw it. In the center of the room stood an altar, a stone structure, covered in ancient symbols, worn with age. Surrounding the altar were the remnants of a ritual, evidence of something that had happened long ago. Strange carvings were etched into the walls, and remnants of candles burned down to stubs littered the floor. But it wasn't the altar that caught their attention. It was the walls seemed to watch them, as though the symbols themselves were alive, tracking their every movement. The group stood frozen, unsure of what to do, their minds racing to make sense of what they were seeing. And then the first of them fell. One of the adventurers collapsed, his body racked with spasms, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The others rushed to his side, but before they could react, he was gone, his body still, his eyes wide with terror. Panic set in. The group scrambled to leave, but the door to the basement slammed shut with a deafening noise. The room seemed to close in on them, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through their very bones. They tried to break the door down, but it was as if the mansion itself was alive, resisting their every attempt to escape. One by one the adventurers fell. Some disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the darkness. Others screamed in agony as they were dragged into the walls, their voices echoing through the corridors. By the time the authorities arrived, the mansion was silent once more. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just the cold, oppressive darkness that had claimed the house for itself. The Blackwell mansion had consumed them all, just as it had consumed Julian before them, and the curse, the dark force that had once been set in motion, continued to hold the mansion in its grip, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. The mansion was sealed once again, but the legend lived on, and as the years passed, the story of the Blackwell estate became nothing more than a whispered warning, a place where death had once taken root, and where the price of greed and ambition could never be undone. The mansion's sinister grip had not loosened. Even after the disappearance of the treasure hunters, the village surrounding it seemed to breathe a collective unease. The very air thick with unspoken dread. Nights were restless, as if the darkness from the house had seeped into the hearts of those who lived nearby. Families whispered to one another about shadowy figures, glimpsed through broken windows, and the strange wailing carried on the wind. Always at the stroke of midnight, no one dared approach the mansion, and yet the lure of its secrets continued to gnaw at the minds of the curious and the greedy.
Months passed, and the mansion became a place of legend. Some claimed they could hear the echo of footsteps long after the house had been abandoned. Others swore they saw glimpses of Julian wandering the halls, a ghostly figure desperately seeking redemption for the wrongs committed in life. The mansion itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with some dark pulse, every corner, every hallway, alive with an intelligence beyond comprehension. Even nature seemed to bow to its power. The trees near the estate grew twisted and blackened, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands. The soil refused to support new growth, and animals avoided the grounds, their instincts warning them away from something the villagers could not see. Then came the outsiders, scholars, historians, and journalists drawn by the infamy of the Blackwell fortune and the haunting tales surrounding the estate. They arrived with tape recorders, cameras, and notepads, convinced that the mansion held answers to centuries-old mysteries, certain that logic and reason could explain away the whispers and shadows. They laughed at the local warnings, dismissing them as superstition. But superstition in this place had a foundation far deeper than mere imagination. The first group entered cautiously, their lights cutting swaths through the thick darkness. They moved with purpose, documenting every detail: the cracked marble floors, the peeling wallpaper, the ornate but decaying furniture. Each room held relics of a life frozen in time, as if the Blackwell family had vanished overnight, leaving behind only echoes of their wealth and power. Yet for every artifact captured, every photograph taken, there was an unsettling presence that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. Shadows seemed to slither along the edges of the walls, disappearing whenever they tried to focus on them. Faint whispers, almost indistinguishable from the creaking of the old wood, spoke in tongues they could not understand. Every rational explanation seemed to crumble in the face of the mansion's oppressive atmosphere. As the group descended into the basement, the air grew colder, heavier, and their breaths fogged in the dim light. The altar still stood in the center, untouched, as if frozen in a ritual that had been abandoned but not complete. The strange symbols etched into the walls seemed to shimmer in the torchlight, catching at the corners of their vision. One of the researchers reached out to touch the carvings, and the room shifted violently. The floor trembled underfoot, and a low, resonant hum filled the chamber, vibrating deep into their bones. Panic set in almost instantly, as the realization hit that the house itself was alive. Aware of their intrusion, one by one they felt the pull, the irresistible, malevolent force that seemed to draw them toward the altar. Voices, indistinct, yet commanding, whispered their names. Some tried to resist, but their bodies moved against their will as though guided by an invisible hand. Shadows coalesced into shapes, monstrous and indescribable, and the first scream tore through the basement, a sound that would be burned into the memories of the survivors forever. But the sound was short-lived. One by one the intruders were dragged into the darkness, swallowed whole by the living mansion. When the authorities eventually arrived, weeks later, there was nothing left. No bodies, no evidence, only the cold silence of a house that had reclaimed its own. The mansion continued to dominate the landscape, an ominous presence on the hill overlooking the village. No one dared approach it, yet stories of sightings and sounds persisted. Travelers passing through the area reported feeling watched, and the persistent, unexplained phenomenon drew attention from paranormal researchers and thrill seekers alike. Every year, new attempts were made to breach the mansion,
always ending in failure, with the participants disappearing terrified beyond comprehension, or returning with tales so horrifying that they could barely speak of them without breaking into panic. It became apparent that the curse of the Blackwell family was not tied solely to Julian's life, or the fortune he had inherited. It had grown stronger over time, fed by greed, fear, and the obsessive desire to uncover what should remain hid. The mansion, once a symbol of opulence, had transformed into an apex of dread, a living entity fueled by centuries of secrets and suffering. No rituals, no prayers, and no mortal efforts could penetrate the dark intelligence that now dwelled within the estate. The village surrounding the mansion suffered as a result. Crops failed repeatedly, livestock fell ill, and an unshakable sense of despair settled over the land. Children spoke of shadows moving on their own, and elders warned travelers never to pass the hill after sunset. The mansion's legacy had spread far beyond its walls, its influence corrupting the air, the soil, and the hearts of those who dwelled nearby. Even the wind seemed different, carrying whispers of the past, the echoes of tragedies that had been left unatoned, and a warning that the mansion's thirst for chaos was far from sated. Legends grew, passed down from generation to generation. Some claimed that the Blackwell mansion could only be approached at certain hours, and even then, it required a strength of will beyond ordinary human endurance. Others believed that the spirits of the lost haunted not only the estate, but the surrounding lands as well, their anger palpable to anyone who dared trespass. The mansion was no longer merely a place. It had become a force, a dark entity that consumed all who crossed its threshold, leaving behind only silence and fear. Yet despite the relentless horror that surrounded it, there remained a small, dangerous curiosity in the human spirit. The mansion called to those who sought answers, those who craved wealth, or knowledge, or those who simply could not resist the allure of the forbidden. And with each new attempt, the mansion grew stronger, its dark consciousness expanding as if fed by every life it claimed. The cycle of terror continued, a horrifying legacy that could not be broken, only endured. The village had grown accustomed to the peculiarities of the Blackwell mansion, as much as one could ever truly become familiar with the unknown. But in recent months, whispers had spread that the mansion's curse was beginning to spill out beyond its walls. It wasn't just the immediate area that suffered anymore. The once thriving village, now withered and decaying, was beginning to experience strange events. People reported vivid nightmares, strange occurrences during the day, lights flickering, objects moving, and distant inexplicable sounds. Some claimed that the mansion's evil had seeped into the very air, spreading like a virus, touching the hearts and minds of even the most resistant villagers. Still, there was always someone drawn to the mansion's sinister allure, someone too curious, or too desperate, to let the mystery lie dormant. And so Julian's heir, despite the curses and warnings, continued his obsession with the mansion. He had inherited the estate after his uncle's mysterious disappearance, and although he wasn't directly involved in the troubling events that had come to define the Blackwell name, he could feel the weight of it, the chilling pull of that cursed legacy. His name was Edward Blackwell, a distant relative who, unlike his uncle, was not one to shy away from dark history but rather sought to dominate it. Edward was a man driven by ambition, with an innate desire to prove his worth. He believed that the fortune left behind by his ancestor could be used to restore the family name, and perhaps end the curse that had haunted the Blackwells for generations. To him, the mansion was a symbol of power, a physical embodiment of wealth and influence waiting to be reclaimed. Despite the dark reputation surrounding it, he had plans to turn the mansion into a beacon of legacy, restoring it to its former grandeur. There would be no haunting that could deter him, no family curse too daunting to overcome. With his determination, Edward embarked on what he believed would be a grand project. He began by investing money into the mansion's restoration, hiring the finest architects, engineers, and contractors. However, No one could shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The construction workers, who had once been thrilled by the challenge, soon started to experience unexplainable events. Tools went missing, blueprints were found torn, and workers swore they heard eerie whispers while they labored in the mansion's shadowed halls. More than once, the workers demanded to leave, citing things they had seen in the mansion: strange figures in the corners of their eyes, moving shadows, the distant sound of footsteps on floors that should have been empty. But Edward, stubborn and determined, brushed off their concern. He had no time for superstition. The mansion had stood for centuries. It was merely old and frail, but not haunted. Surely not. He believed that with enough money, enough willpower, and enough effort, the mansion could be saved from its dark past. He continued to press on, overseeing every detail himself, refusing to let fear, superstition, or the strange happenings dissuade him. Then came the night of the first terrible incident. It was a crisp autumn evening, when the mansion seemed to come alive with a new kind of energy. The air grew thick with tension, as though something was stirring deep within the mansion's walls. Edward, after a long day of overseeing the restoration efforts, stayed late, working alone in his study. He had just finished reviewing the latest plans for the estate's gardens, when the air around him grew suddenly cold, too cold for an autumn evening. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the floor beneath him seemed to creak ominously, as though something was moving just out of sight. A sharp knock at the door startled him, and before he could respond, the door swung open with an eerie force. There stood one of the workers, his face pale and shaken, eyes wide with terror. "Mr. Blackwell, you have to come. It's happening again," the worker stammered. Edward, though slightly unnerved by the man's appearance, stood and made his way toward him. "What's going on?" The worker, trembling, didn't speak for a moment, his eyes darting nervously toward the open door. "It's in the walls, sir. It's coming from inside the mansion. We heard it. Mr. Blackwell, please, come see for yourself." With growing unease, Edward followed the worker down the grand staircase. The mansion had always felt empty at night, the silence oppressive, but tonight, it felt different. The house itself felt as though it was alive, watching them with a malevolent intent. As they approached the grand foyer, Edward could hear the sounds, the strange scratching noises echoing from within the walls. They sounded like something desperately trying to claw its way out. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the hallway slammed shut, startling them both. Edward's heart pounded in his chest as he approached, the sound of his footsteps almost deafening in the silence. He reached for the door handle, and as he touched it, the temperature dropped further, his skin prickling with an unsettling sensation. Without hesitation, he turned the handle and stepped inside. What he saw left him speechless. The room was bathed in an eerie, unnatural light, and the walls, oh, the walls, they seemed to writhe and shift, as though they were made of living flesh. The scratching had intensified, and it was now accompanied by the sound of muffled whispers, like voices trapped behind the plaster. Edward's pulse quickened as he stumbled backward, the weight of what he was witnessing pressing down on him. And then, it happened. A section of the wall, near the back of the room, buckled inward. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and what emerged from the wall sent Edward reeling. It was a figure, a twisted skeletal figure, that seemed to be made of shadow and bone, its hollow eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Edward staggered back, horrified. The thing, it was no longer human, not entire. It moved with unnatural speed, crawling toward him with a grotesque hunger, its clawed fingers scraping across the floor. "Get out of here," the worker yelled, pulling Edward by the arm. But Edward, paralyzed by fear and shock, couldn't move. He was transfixed, unable to look away from the thing that was slowly advancing toward him. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished, evaporating into the walls, as though it had never been there at all. Edward stood, trembling, his mind racing to comprehend what he had just witnessed. Was it real? Had he imagined it? No. The stench was too real, the cold too unnatural. Something was terribly wrong with this mansion, something that no amount of money or effort could fix. The worker, pale and shaking, pulled him to his feet, "We need to leave, sir. This house is cursed." But Edward could not hear him. The mansion had begun to speak to him, its voice now louder, clearer, a voice that came from deep within the house. It was calling to him, demanding something from him. He had to know what it wanted, what it had been hiding all these years. Little did he know that the mansion's curse had already taken hold of him. The box, now open in Edward's trembling hands, contained more than just the journal. A peculiar scent filled the room, something metallic and pungent, like iron and rust. He tried to steady his breath, but the unease gnawed at him, as though the very air in the chamber had shifted. The whispers around him turned into a cacophony, a frantic crescendo of voices, pressing against his mind, demanding to be heard. They had waited so long, and now at last, someone had come to unlock the secrets they had buried. Edward's fingers brushed the surface of the journal, its leather cool to the touch, but somehow still warm with an almost unsettling presence. As he opened the first page, the words seemed to leap out at him, written in an elegant flowing script, but with a clarity that bordered on unnatural. The first line read, "To be born into this house is to be cursed by time itself." Edward felt a chill run down his spine as he read the sentence, feeling it reverberate in his chest. He turned the page, heart pound. The words on the next page made his stomach drop. The Blackwell legacy is built on a pact that binds the family to an ancient and malevolent force, a creature that feeds on blood and time. In exchange for wealth, power, and immortality, the Blackwells must offer the lives of their own blood, their own flesh, to the creature who dwells in the house. Edward's hands began to shake as the truth began to unravel before him. The mansion, this accursed place, had been more than just a home. It was a prison for his family's dark legacy. He flipped through the pages, each one more horrifying than the last. The journal detailed the rituals, the blood sacrifices made by each generation of Blackwells, including his own father, to sustain the creature trapped within the mansion's walls. There was mention of a binding spell, one that ensured the creature's power would never fade, never die. The creature was tied to the house, feeding off the blood of its occupants, its power growing with each passing year, and with each generation, the cost became higher. The lives of the family, their very essence, drawn into the dark force they had bargained with centuries ago. Edward felt his pulse quicken as the full weight of the curse pressed down upon him. The whispers grew louder, now almost deafening, as though the mansion itself was alive, reacting to his discovery. His fingers traced the faded ink of the journal, the words almost seeming to change before his eyes. The final page revealed the most chilling truth of all. The creature, though bound to the house, was not the true master. It was a servant to a greater, darker force, an ancient evil, that had been summoned into this world by his very ancestors. The Blackwells had not only sold their souls to the creature, they had summoned it, welcomed it, and bound themselves to its will.
Edward stumbled back from the altar, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. His ancestors had brought this upon them. They had sealed the fate of every Blackwell for generations, and now with his inheritance, the creature was waiting for him, waiting for the final sacrifice. Suddenly the room seemed to grow darker. The walls groaned, as if the house itself was shifting, reacting to the awakening of its dark history. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Edward could see his breath clouding in front of him. The whispers, now a frantic chorus, filled his ears, urging him to leave, but also compelling him to stay. Edward's eyes darted around the chamber, panic rising within him. His feet moved without his command, taking him toward the door. But when he tried to push it open, it wouldn't budge. He slammed his shoulder into the door, but it felt as though something was holding it shut, a force far stronger than anything he could comprehend. The whispers became louder, more urgent, demanding that he complete the ritual. Edward gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. As he struggled to breathe, he had to get out. He had to stop it before it was too late. But then, from the darkness in the corners of the room, a figure began to take shape. It was shadowy at first, but then it grew clearer, solidifying into something grotesque, The figure was tall, almost impossibly so, and its skin was pale and translucent, like stretched parchment. Its eyes were dark voids, endless and deep, staring into Edward's soul. The creature stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, and Edward froze. The air around him seemed to constrict, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The creature's lips curled into a smile, revealing rows of sharp, yellow teeth. "You have come to claim your inheritance," the creature whispered, its voice a low, guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through Edward's very bones. "And now, you will fulfill your bloodline's fate." Edward's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled back, desperate for any way out, but there was nowhere to go. The room had closed in around him, the darkness swallowing him whole. The creature's smile widened, and it reached out a long, skeletal hand, its fingers brushing against Edward's cheek. "You cannot escape," the creature murmured. "You are bound to this house, just as your ancestors were before you. Your blood is mine now." Edward's mind raced. He had to fight it. He couldn't let this happen. But the creature's grip tightened, and his vision blurred. The mansion's walls seemed to close in on him, the very air turning thick and suffocating. The whispers grew into a deafening roar, and he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness. But as his vision dimmed, something inside him snapped. With a final surge of willpower, Edward threw himself forward, slamming his shoulder into the creature's chest. It let out a low growl of surprise, its grip loosening for a moment. That was all he needed. Edward broke free from the creature's hold and ran toward the door, pushing it open with all his strength. He felt a surge of freedom as the door creaked open, and he stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. The mansion trembled around him as he ran, the whispers fading into silence. But Edward knew that the creature was still there, waiting for him, waiting for the final sacrifice. The mansion had not let him go. He was still bound to its dark legacy. And as he ran into the night, the creature's voice echoed in his mind, a whisper that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Edward stumbled into the cold night air, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His legs felt like they might give way at any moment. But he forced himself forward, away from the mansion. He didn't look back. He could. The creature's eyes still haunted him, burning into his memory. And the whispers, those terrible, maddening whispers, seemed to follow him, echoing in the back of his mind, never quite fading. He had done it. He had escaped. But Edward knew the truth now. A truth that weighed heavily on his soul. The mansion wasn't just a home. It was a prison, an unholy vessel for a curse that had plagued his family for generations. And the creature that dwelled there wasn't merely a servant of darkness. It was a master, one that fed on blood, on time, and on the suffering of those it ensnared. But what truly terrified him wasn't the creature itself. It was the knowledge that he was now bound to it, just as his ancestors had been. As he walked, the chill of the night seemed to seep into his bones, and the fog of the mansion still lingered in his thought. He had inherited not just wealth, but a terrible burden, one that would follow him for the rest of his life. He had been given a chance to escape, but that chance was slipping away like sand through his fingers. Edward had learned that the Blackwell bloodline was cursed, that the creature would never truly be satisfied, no matter how many lives it consumed. And what had been passed down to him, what he was now inheriting, was a curse that no amount of money, no amount of power could ever. The trees loomed in the distance, dark silhouettes against the moonlit sky. Edward kept his head down, trying to push away the lingering thoughts of the creature and the mansion that would forever be tied to his family's name. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't outrun it. It wasn't until he reached the edge of the woods that Edward stopped, leaning against a tree,
gasping for air. His mind was spinning. He had to think. He had to find a way to break free from this curse. He couldn't keep running forever. He couldn't live the rest of his life knowing that the creature in the mansion, the creature that had haunted his bloodline for centuries, was still waiting for him, still watching from the shadows. But what could he do? His ancestors had tried to escape, they had tried to hide, but in the end, they had all failed. Each generation had been swallowed by the curse, each bloodline growing darker and darker, until it had reached him. Now Edward was no different. He was caught in its grip, just as they had been. There was no escape, no redemption. Edward pushed away from the tree, his legs shaky as he stood upright. The truth was clear. There was only one way to stop the creature, one way to sever the ties that bound him to it. He had to destroy the mansion, destroy the source of the curse. But that meant returning to the place he had fled from, the very heart of the darkness that had haunted his family for centuries. His heart thudded in his chest. The decision was impossible, and yet he knew it was the only choice. Edward couldn't live with this burden anymore. He couldn't live knowing that the creature, the curse, would eventually consume him, just as it had consumed every Blackwell before him. But how could he destroy something so powerful? How could he kill the very thing that had destroyed his bloodline, that had fed on their lives for generations? As these thoughts plagued him, the answer seemed to come in a flash, a fleeting thought that seemed to push its way to the forefront of his mind. Despite the fog of fear and doubt clouding his judgment, he had to face it. He had to face the creature head on. Armed with the knowledge he had gained from the journal, he had to destroy the mansion itself, break the foundation of the curse, and sever the connection that had bound the Blackwells to the darkness. Only then, he believed, could he escape. Only then could he end this madness. Edward stood tall, wiping the cold sweat from his brow. The weight of his decision felt like a boulder pressing down on his chest. But he knew what he had to do. He couldn't escape. The creature had been born from the mansion, fed by the blood of his ancestors. The mansion was the source of the curse, and only by destroying it would he be free. But the road ahead would be treacherous. He would have to return to that accursed place, face the darkness that had lurked in the mansion for so long. And he knew deep down that the creature would not go quietly. It would fight for its existence with everything it. Edward closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts, steeling himself for the inevitable confrontation. It wasn't just the mansion that had to be destroyed. It was the creature itself, the very thing that had been feeding on his family for so long, the very thing that had been waiting for him, waiting for the right moment to claim him as its next victim. He couldn't let it win. He couldn't let it claim him the way it had claimed so many others before him. With one last deep breath, Edward opened his eyes. He turned toward the mansion, its silhouette looming in the distance. He had a long road ahead of him, and the creature would not make it easy. But he was ready. For the first time in his life, Edward felt a spark of hope. The curse might have been passed down through his bloodline, but it didn't have to end with him. He could break the chain. He could put an end to the nightmare that had been haunting his family for generations. It was time to face the creature and end the Blackwell curse once and for all. Edward stood before the mansion, the heavy silence of the night surrounding him. The wind had died down, leaving the air unnervingly still, as though the very world was holding its breath. He could feel the weight of the centuries pressing down on him, the curse of the Blackwell bloodline wrapping itself around his throat like an iron chain. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows dark, its doors shut tight, as if it were waiting for him, waiting to swallow him whole. Edward knew that once he stepped foot inside, there would be no turning back. The mansion would either claim him, or he would destroy it, once and for all. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the terrifying truth. He had inherited not just wealth, but a curse, a legacy that would never let him go. His ancestors had tried to escape it, had tried to bury it, But the curse had always found them. Now it was his turn to face the monster that had haunted his bloodline for centuries. With a deep breath, he took his first step toward the front door. The ground beneath his feet felt solid, yet it seemed to shift with every step he took, as though the earth itself was unwilling to let him leave. The house was alive with a malignant presence, watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Edward reached the door, the brass handle cold under his fingers. It felt as if the house were trying to pull him inside, like a spider waiting to trap its prey. But he wasn't afraid, not anymore. He turned the handle and pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges breaking the silence of the night. A rush of stale air hit him, carrying with it the scent of old wood, dust, and something far more sinister. It was as if the house had been waiting for him to arrive, and now that he was here, it was ready to make its move. Edward stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind him with a deafening thud. He felt a chill run down his spine as he stood in the entryway, the darkness of the house pressing in on him. The air felt thick, heavy, as though it were filled with the weight of all the lives that had been lost within these walls. The house was silent, but Edward knew better. The creature was here. It was always here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. He could feel its presence, its eyes on him, tracking his every movement. He moved cautiously through the grand hallway, his footsteps echoing through the empty house. The wallpaper was peeling, the once gilded furniture covered in dust, the paintings on the walls twisted with age and rot. It was as if the house itself was decaying, dying, waiting for the final blow. Edward reached the staircase and paused, glancing up at the landing above. The darkness was suffocating, thick like tar, and the air was cold, but he couldn't turn back. He had come too far. With a steady breath, he began to climb the stairs, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the mansion. He could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on him, the ghosts of his ancestors whispering in his ear, warning him to turn around, to leave while he still could. But Edward wasn't afraid, not anymore. He reached the top of the stairs and stepped into the hallway, the darkness enveloping him like a living thing. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. He had one goal: to destroy the mansion, to break the curse that had haunted his family for generations. He moved through the halls, searching for the creature, searching for the heart of the curse. He could feel its presence growing stronger, the air thick with malevolence. The house seemed to groan under the weight of the darkness, its walls creaking and shifting as though they were alive. Finally, he reached the door he had been dreading. It stood at the end of the hall, an old wooden door covered in strange symbols, the wood dark and warped with age. It was the entrance to the creature's lair, the place where the curse had originated. It was where the Blackwell bloodline had been bound to the darkness for generations. Edward knew what he had to do. He had to break the door, destroy the creature, and end the curse once and for all. He reached for the handle, his fingers trembling as he gripped it. The door was cold, unyielding, but it didn't matter. He would break it. He had to, for his family, for himself. With a grunt, he yanked the door open, the wood splintering under the force of his grip. Inside, the room was pitch black, the air thick with the scent of decay and rot. The creature was there. He could feel it, watching him. "Come out," Edward whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I'm here to end this." The shadows seemed to shift, the air crackling with an unnatural energy. Edward stepped into the room, his heart racing, every nerve on edge. He could hear something moving in the darkness, something slithering, crawling toward him. And then from the shadows it emerged. The creature was massive, its form twisting and writhing as it moved toward him. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Edward could feel its power, its hunger, its desire to consume him, but he didn't flinch. He had come here to end this, and he would not back down. With a roar, the creature lunged at him, its claws reaching out to tear him apart. But Edward was ready. He pulled the ancient dagger from his belt, the one that had been passed down through the Blackwell bloodline for centuries. It was the only weapon that could kill the creature, the only way to end the curse. With a swift, practiced motion, Edward drove the dagger into the creature's heart. It screamed, a horrible guttural sound that reverberated through the mansion, shaking the very walls. But it was too late. The creature writhed and twisted, its form dissolving into the air, leaving behind nothing but a faint, lingering stench of death. And then silence. Edward stood there, panting, his heart racing. As the last of the creature's power faded away, the mansion felt different now, lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from it. The curse was broken, but Edward knew that it had come at a cost. The mansion was gone, but the darkness would always linger. He had destroyed the creature, but the Blackwell bloodline would never be the same. It had been tainted by the curse, and there would always be a price to pay. Still, Edward felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had done what no one before him had been able to do. He had broken the curse, and with that, he walked out of the mansion, leaving the past behind him. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat.